Welcome to another deep dive brought to you by Special Man Academy, the learning hub over at Special Man Global Solution. For those of you who might not be familiar, Special Man Global Solution is a software development company that helps innovators like you, develop their tech ideas.
Yeah.
But today, we're going to be looking at something that's really important, especially for those of you in the bespoke software development service industry.
Okay.
And that is applying the NIST cybersecurity framework, or CSF 2.0, to the unique challenges you face when you're doing custom software development.
Right. Exactly. And just to be clear, we're not going to be doing a basic intro to CSS here.
Right.
This is for the pros, the people who are already working in this industry and have a solid grasp of the NIST CSF fundamentals.
Exactly.
Because let's face it, building custom software, it's a whole different animal compared to just deploying off-the-shelf solutions.
Yeah.
Especially when you're thinking about security.
Yeah. And why is that?
Well, you're often dealing with clients who have very, very specific needs. And, sometimes those standard security models that you might use for a more general product just don't cut it.
That's a great point. And then you also have the fact that the threats themselves are constantly evolving.
Right.
It's not a static landscape.
Right.
And bespoke applications, just by their very nature, they stand out, right?
They do.
They're unique.
Right.
And that can actually, unfortunately, make them a more attractive target for bad actors out there.
Sure.
Because they might look at a novel system and think, hey, maybe there are vulnerabilities here that haven't been discovered yet,
Exactly.
So it really requires a much more robust, tailored security approach than you might get away with if you were just working with a standard commercial off-the-shelf product.
Yeah. And, you can't just rely on pre-built security features.
Right.
You're often building security from the ground up.
Absolutely. You're starting from scratch.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the integration challenge. I mean, how often does custom software exist in isolation? Almost never, right?
Right.
You're always connecting to legacy systems, to other third-party services, and each of those connections essentially expands the potential area of attack, the attack surface, as we call it.
Sure.
So we're painting a pretty complex picture here with these unique challenges of bespoke development.
Yeah.
And this is where I think the NIST CSF 2.0 really steps up to the plate.
Okay.
It provides a structured, but very importantly, a really adaptable way to weave security best practices into every single phase of these custom software development projects.
Right.
So think of NIST CSF, if you will, as your software security compass.
Okay.
You've got govern, which is all about setting that direction, making sure everyone's on the same page.
Right.
Then there's identify, which is like mapping the terrain, understanding what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Then you have protect, building those defenses.
Right.
Detect, which is raising the alarm when something looks suspicious.
Got it.
Respond, managing the crisis if something does happen. And then finally, recover, getting back on track.
Perfect. Yeah. That's a really good way to think about it. And it's not just about best practices. It's really becoming essential in today's environment.
Totally.
Clients, especially in those highly regulated industries like finance, healthcare, and government, they're demanding more. They want to see proof. They want those assurances.
Yeah, they want to see that you're adhering to these standards, these rigorous standards.
Exactly.
We're talking PCI DSS, HIPAA, NIST, SP 800, 171, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Yeah, there's a whole alphabet soup of regulations out there.
Exactly. And it's not just about avoiding those technical headaches, which are bad enough.
Sure.
But failing to meet these requirements can have serious legal and reputational consequences for your business.
Absolutely. It can sink a company.
It can, absolutely.
Right.
So integrating the NIST CSF isn't just a nice to have, it's really about building and maintaining trust with your clients.
Yeah, it's demonstrating that you take their security as seriously as they do.
And ultimately, that govern function we talked about, it's ensuring that security isn't just a technical task, it's a core business value.
It's baked right into the way you do business.
Absolutely. Now, another strength of the NIST CSF is its structure, right?
Yeah, that framework of functions, categories, and subcategories. That's what makes it so powerful.
And it provides that structure, but it's flexible at the same time.
That's the key. It's not rigid.
So it can adapt to different development approaches.
Right.
Whether you're using Agile, which is all about those iterative cycles, or DevOps with its continuous integration, or even a more traditional waterfall method, the NIST CSF can work.
Exactly. And it does this by directly aligning those security efforts with the client's business objectives.
It's not just security for security's sake. It's security that supports the business.
Right.
So the goal for this depth dive is to really explore why the NIST CSF 2.0 is so essential, specifically for bespoke development.
Yeah, that's where we're going to focus.
We'll look at how its core functions can be applied practically throughout the entire software development lifecycle.
From start to finish.
And we'll walk through an actionable plan and look at a real-world case study to see it all come together.
Perfect. So let's start by digging into why NIST CSF matters, especially for bespoke development. We've touched on the unique challenges, but it's worth really diving in a bit deeper.
Yeah, let's unpack those a little bit more.
When you've got highly specialized requirements, sometimes those generic security best practices, they're a good starting point, but they just aren't enough.
Right.
You need a framework that lets you tailor those security measures specifically to the application you're building.
Exactly. The data it handles, the environment it's going to be operating in, all of that.
Right. And you have to remember, bespoke software is unique. It stands out.
Yeah.
That can make it a juicy target for attackers. They might think, hey, this is a new system. Maybe we can find some holes that no one else has discovered yet. So a strong, tailored security approach isn't just good practice. It can be essential for survival in the bespoke world.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's about proactively protecting your clients.
Yeah.
Now, we also talked about the lack of pre-built security controls.
Right. That's a big one.
You can't just rely on default settings or those established libraries in the same way you might with off-the-shelf software.
No, you have to be much more deliberate about security.
Yeah, it's got to be a conscious effort, integrated from the very beginning.
Every step of the way.
And then there's that integration piece, which is, it's huge.
Massive.
I mean, when you're connecting a brand new custom application to legacy systems.
Right, the older systems that maybe weren't built with the same level of security in mind.
Exactly, or relying on third-party APIs, you're widening that attack surface.
It's like opening more doors for potential attackers.
And that's where the CSF is really valuable.
Yeah.
It helps you think about those connections holistically.
Right.
And implement security measures across that entire ecosystem.
Yeah, it's about securing the whole chain, not just individual links.
So we've got those unique challenges. Now let's talk about the specific client expectations and compliance demands.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty.
In finance, for example, PCI DSS, if you're processing credit card data, it's practically non-negotiable.
Yeah, it's the gold standard for payment card security.
And then you've got regulations like FFIEC and SEC, which dictate how financial institutions have to protect data and transactions.
Right, they're all about safeguarding financial systems and customer data.
And in healthcare, HIPAA and HITRUST set a really high bar for protecting patient data.
Yeah, those are serious requirements.
Encryption, access controls, incident response plans, it's not just a recommendation, it's the law.
And the penalties for noncompliance can be pretty steep.
They can, absolutely. And then anyone working on government contracts, you're probably familiar with NIST SP 800-171.
Yeah, that's a big one for government contractors.
CMMC, FISMA, they all have very specific, often rigorous security controls you've got to meet.
And they're getting stricter all the time.
Yeah, it's a constantly evolving landscape. So it's clear that for bespoke development, especially in these sectors, just saying you're secure doesn't cut it anymore.
No, you need to be able to demonstrate it, prove it.
You need a structured way to show compliance and, more importantly, actually achieve that level of security.
And that's where the beauty of NIST CSF 2.0 really comes in.
Absolutely. It provides that structure.
And it does it through a risk-based approach, which is so important.
Yeah, you're not just checking boxes. You're really understanding the risks and prioritizing your efforts based on what matters most.
Exactly. Think of it like, checking the blueprints of a house for weaknesses before you build it.
Right.
You're identifying where those burglars might try to break in so you can reinforce those areas.
And as we said before, it's modular, it's flexible.
Yeah, you can adapt it to fit different methodologies.
If you're using Agile, it works. Waterfall, it works. It's not a one-size-fits-all rigid framework.
Exactly. And that flexibility is crucial, especially in today's fast-paced development environments.
Absolutely. And ultimately, the NIST CSF is all about business-driven security.
Right, aligning those security efforts with what matters most to the client.
Making sure your efforts are actually protecting the client's most critical assets and objectives.
Yeah, it's about security that makes sense for the business, not just security for its own sake.
So the big takeaway for everyone in the bespoke development world is that adopting the NIST CSF 2.0 is a win-win.
It is.
It's about making your custom solutions genuinely more secure.
Right.
It's about reassuring your clients.
Showing them you take their security seriously.
And it's about building that trust.
And all of that while still allowing for innovation and agility.
You don't have to sacrifice speed or creativity.
Not at all.
Now let's get to the heart of the matter, shall we?
Let's do it.
Mapping those core functions of the NIST CSF to the software development lifecycle.
Okay.
So as we mentioned, CSF 2.0 revolves around 6 core functions.
Right.
Govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover.
Yeah. Think of these as the big buckets, the high-level categories that cover everything under the cybersecurity umbrella.
And it's important to remember these functions, they're not necessarily sequential.
Right.
You don't just do one and then move on to the next.
They're all interconnected.
And ideally, you're addressing them concurrently.
You've got to be thinking about all of them throughout the entire process.
Absolutely. So let's start with govern. This is the foundation, right?
Yeah, it's all about establishing that security-first culture.
Making sure security is embedded in your business goals, your compliance requirements, your risk management strategy.
It's about making sure everyone understands that security is not an afterthought, it's a core value.
And in the bespoke development world, what does that look like?
Well, it means having clear security governance policies specifically for your custom development teams.
Right. It's not just general company policies. It's tailored to the specific work you're doing.
Exactly. And it means defining roles very clearly.
Who does what?
Who's responsible for what aspects of security? How are the testers involved? How do the dedicated security teams collaborate with the developers?
You've got to have that clarity.
And you need to incorporate security metrics into your project management.
Yeah, make it measurable.
How quickly are vulnerabilities addressed? What's the level of compliance with secure coding standards? These things need to be tracked.
And of course, making sure your development processes are aligned with relevant industry regulations.
Absolutely. HIPAA, PCI DSS, ISO 27001, whatever applies to your clients.
You've got to know those inside and out.
And make sure you're meeting those requirements.
Right. So let's say you're a financial services company and you're developing a custom banking app.
Okay.
You might integrate those CSF-aligned security policies right into your agile sprints.
Right into the development process.
With security reviews happening at every iteration.
So security is baked in from day one.
It's not an afterthought. It's part of the DNA of the project.
Exactly. Now, let's move on to identify. This function is all about understanding what you need to protect and what you're up against.
Before you even start building anything, right?
You got it. You need to identify the assets, the vulnerabilities, the potential attack vectors.
So in bespoke development, you start with those client risk assessments.
Yeah, you need to understand the data.
How sensitive is it?
What are the client's specific compliance obligations?
What kind of threats are they likely to face?
You need to get a complete picture of the landscape.
And then you do an asset inventory.
Not just listing servers, but documenting the custom code, the APIs, the third-party libraries, the cloud environments, everything.
It's a comprehensive picture of the technology you're using.
And then comes threat modeling.
Thinking like the bad guys.
Exactly. Put yourself in the attacker's shoes. Where are the weaknesses? What are the potential attack paths?
In the business logic, the authentication mechanisms, the data storage, the dependencies on other systems.
It's about proactively finding those weak points.
And there's a great methodology called STRIDE that can help with this.
Yeah, it's a systematic way to ask what could go wrong.
So you're not just guessing, you're using a structured approach.
And a great example is a healthcare software company mapping out the flow of protected health information in a custom EHR system.
Right, so they can see where that data is going, where it's being stored, and identify potential security gaps even before they start coding.
It's about getting ahead of the curve.
Now, once you know what you need to protect and the risks involved, then it's time to protect.
That's where the rubber meets the road, actually implementing those security controls.
This is about preventing attacks and data breaches.
Right, so first up, you need secure coding standards.
This is where organizations like OWASP come in, CWE, SAMS.
They provide those guidelines, those best practices for writing secure code.
And then you've got access controls.
Role-based access control, least privilege, multi-factor authentication.
Yeah, making sure the right people have access to the right things and no more.
And don't forget encryption.
Absolutely crucial. Encrypting sensitive data both in transit and at rest.
End-to-end encryption. Secure API communication using protocols like PLS, data masking, database encryption.
All essential, especially for bespoke apps handling sensitive data.
Yeah, it's about layering those protections.
Now imagine a government contractor working on a highly classified project.
Okay.
They might enforce zero trust principles.
Meaning no user or device is trusted by default.
They'd use heavily encrypted APIs and granular access controls to really lock down that data.
Yeah, maybe using algorithms like AES 256 for the extra level of protection.
And that brings us to detect.
Right, because no system is ever foolproof.
The detect function is all about that proactive monitoring and alerting for anomalies and potential threats.
It's about having your eyes and ears open, even when you think you've done everything right.
So robust logging and monitoring systems are key here.
Security information and event management, or SIEM solutions, are really helpful, especially for client-specific deployments.
They can aggregate and analyze all that security data from different sources.
And they can help you identify those subtle patterns that might indicate a threat.
And automation is your friend here.
Absolutely. Integrating automated security testing tools like SAST and DAST into your CI/CD pipeline is essential.
Yeah, catch those vulnerabilities early in the development process.
Before they make it into production.
And we're seeing more and more use of behavioral anomaly detection.
Using AI to spot those unusual patterns that could signal an insider threat or something fishy going on.
Right, like maybe someone's trying to access data they shouldn't.
Or an API is being hammered with requests from a suspicious source.
So let's say you're a retail company with a custom e-commerce platform.
Okay.
You might use automated scanners in your DevOps pipeline to constantly check for common web vulnerabilities like SQL injection risks.
And you'd be doing this continuously even before the code goes live.
So you're constantly on the lookout for potential problems.
Exactly. Now, even with all these measures in place, sometimes bad things still happen.
That's right.
And that's where Respond comes in.
This is about incident management, containment, and communication when something does go wrong.
Right. The first thing you need is a well-defined incident response playbook.
Essentially, a custom plan for different types of attacks.
What do you do if there's a suspected data breach? What about a ransomware attack? You need to map out those steps in advance.
So you're not scrambling when it happens.
Exactly. And then you can put in place automated containment measures.
Like automatically updating firewall rules, locking out compromised accounts, throttling suspicious traffic.
Those things can buy you valuable time.
And then after an incident, it's vital to do that post-incident analysis.
Yeah, figure out what happened, how it happened, and how to prevent it from happening again.
So let's say you're a fintech company and you're particularly concerned about API fraud.
Okay.
You might develop a predefined response plan specifically for that.
If your monitoring systems detect something suspicious, the plan kicks in.
Maybe it automatically blocks the originating IP address or sends an alert to the security team.
It's about having those pre-programmed responses ready to go.
And finally, we have recover.
Right. This is about bouncing back, ensuring business continuity for your clients.
Restoring services, improving resilience.
So you need client-tailored backup strategies.
This could be geographically redundant, backups in the cloud, real-time data replication, even offline cold storage for really critical data.
You've got to have multiple layers of protection.
And then you need those comprehensive disaster recovery plans.
Your business continuity procedures, your recovery time objectives.
How quickly can you get back up and running?
That needs to be clearly defined.
And just like with incident response, continuous improvement is key.
Learn from each incident. Make your systems and processes stronger.
So imagine a SaaS provider hosting custom HR software.
Okay.
Their recovery plan should ensure that they can restore their clients' critical data really quickly.
Within a specific time frame, maybe 30 minutes.
To minimize that disruption to their business operations.
So you can keep things running smoothly.
So we've walked through those 6 core functions, how they relate to bespoke development. Now, what about putting this all into action?
Right. Let's talk about actually using this framework.
So the NIST documentation provides a really helpful action plan.
It does.
Starting with a quick reference checklist.
A great tool to help you ensure you're considering those NIST CSM principles throughout the SDLC.
From beginning to end.
Right. So let's go through those checklist items, function by function.
Starting with govern.
Okay, so under govern, you want to define those clear security roles for everyone involved.
Right. Who's responsible for what?
Make sure your policies are aligned with industry regulations.
Those high PA, PCI, DSS, and others we talked about.
Set those measurable security KPIs, those key performance indicators.
So you can track your progress.
And crucially, train your developers on secure coding and threat modeling.
Yeah, give them the skills they need.
For identify, the checklist emphasizes those client risk assessments.
Understanding the client's specific needs and risks.
Maintaining that comprehensive asset inventory.
Not just the hardware, but all the software components too.
And performing regular threat modeling exercises.
Using methodologies like STRIDE to proactively find vulnerabilities.
For Protect, the checklist reminds you to enforce those secure coding guidelines from OWASP, CWE, SANS.
Make sure those are being followed.
Implement robust access controls.
Role-based access, multi-factor authentication.
And ensure that data is encrypted, both in transit and at rest.
Using strong protocols and algorithms.
Under Detect, you want to set up those logging and monitoring systems.
Maybe using a SIEM solution.
Integrate automated security testing tools.
Your SAST and DAST.
And establish those real-time alerts for suspicious activity.
So you can respond quickly.
For Respond, the checklist focuses on those incident response playbooks.
Having those plans in place for different scenarios.
Automating security responses where possible.
To contain threats quickly.
And conducting that thorough post-incident analysis.
To learn and improve.
And finally, for Recover, you've got those client-specific backup and disaster recovery plans.
Make sure those are in place and tested.
Regularly test your recovery strategies to make sure they actually work.
And continuously improve those processes based on what you learn.
It's a cycle of constant improvement.
No, it's not just about checklists.
Right.
The NIST framework also talks about integrating those CSF principles into your proposals.
When you're bidding for projects.
Yeah, make it clear that security is a top priority.
So you want to explicitly mention those NIST CSF-aligned security commitments.
Show the client you understand the importance of security.
And highlight your understanding of industry-specific compliance.
Like GDPR or HIPAA.
And a clear, risk-based security roadmap in your proposal can really make you stand out.
It shows you've thought this through.
And it builds confidence with the client.
Like if you're a SaaS provider bidding for a government contract.
You want to demonstrate that you meet those strict federal cybersecurity requirements.
And a NIST CSF-aligned approach can help you do that.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk about integrating NIST CSF into the SDLC, the software development lifecycle.
Yeah, this is about mapping those functions to each phase of development.
So, during requirements gathering, you're focused on identify.
Conducting those client risk assessments and compliance checks.
Then, in design and architecture, you're thinking about both identify and protect.
Doing threat modeling, designing secure APIs, planning your access control mechanisms.
When you move into development, the focus is on protect.
Following those secure coding standards, implementing RBAC and encryption.
During testing, you're aligned with detect.
Integrating your SAST and DAST tools, scanning for vulnerable libraries, doing those security unit tests.
In deployment, you're thinking about both protect and detect again.
Implementing real-time monitoring, setting up those SIEM solutions, getting your anomaly detection systems in place.
And finally, in maintenance and updates, it's respond and recover.
Having those incident response plans, disaster recovery procedures, and a solid patch management process.
So every stage of development has its own security considerations.
And the NIST CSF helps you map those out.
Exactly. Now, one last important point from the action plan.
Okay.
Client deliverables focused on security.
It's not enough to just build secure software. You need to demonstrate that security to your clients.
Right, you need to prove it.
And the best way to do that is through clear, comprehensive documentation.
That aligns with the NIST CSF.
So you might provide a security risk assessment report
outlining the threats you identified, the risks, and how you're mitigating them.
A secure development and compliance report.
Showing how your controls map to the client's specific regulatory requirements.
And an incident response and recovery plan.
Giving them confidence that you have a plan in place if something goes wrong.
Like if you're developing custom HR software, you might include a security assessment report highlighting how your system meets ISO 27001 standards.
That kind of documentation can really give clients peace of mind.
It shows you've gone the extra mile.
So to sum up the action plan, use that checklist, make security part of your proposals, map the NIST CSF to your SDLC, and provide those security-focused deliverables.
Now, to really see all of this in action, let's look at a case study.
Okay, a real-world example.
This one focuses on a fintech startup called PaySecure.
And they were developing a custom online payment platform for high-risk transactions.
So security was absolutely paramount.
Right. And they had those explicit PCI DSS and NIST CSF compliance requirements from their client.
Because they were dealing with sensitive financial data.
Credit card numbers, bank account details, the works.
So the first step for PaySecure was identify.
Understanding those critical risks.
They did a thorough risk assessment and threat modeling using that stride methodology,
And they found some potential issues.
like risks associated with the third-party APIs they were using.
Those are always a potential weak point.
They found possible SQL injection vulnerabilities in their transaction logs.
Yeah, a common but dangerous vulnerability.
And they realized that customer payment tokens were being stored unencrypted.
A big no-no, especially with PCI DSS.
So to address these issues, they used Stride for that threat modeling.
To systematically analyze those potential attack paths.
They created a detailed risk register to track everything.
So nothing fell through the cracks.
And they recommended tokenization for storing those payment card details.
A much more secure way to handle that sensitive data.
Then in the protect phase, they put those controls in place.
Secure coding practices, API security, data protection, the whole 9 yards.
They followed OAuth's top 10 guidelines, things like input validation and escaping.
To prevent those injection attacks.
They did peer code reviews using GitHub's code scanning tools.
To catch those errors early on.
For their APIs, they implemented OAuth 2.0.
A more secure way to handle authentication.
They limited API access using IP whitelisting and rate limiting.
To prevent abuse.
And they implemented end-to-end encryption for payment data.
Using AES 256, a very strong encryption standard.
And role-based access control for their internal users.
So only authorized personnel could access sensitive information.
And the results were impressive.
They eliminated those injection vulnerabilities, secured their API authentication, and met those PCI DSS requirements.
And the client was thrilled.
Right, they felt confident that PaySecure was taking security seriously.
And it all came down to that clear communication.
They provided a detailed security posture report.
Showing what they had done, how they were compliant.
They did a live security demo.
To show off their systems in action.
And they provided a detailed incident response plan.
So the client knew what to expect if something went wrong.
That level of transparency was key.
And it paid off.
The client was reassured. They got regulatory and investor approval. And they passed PCI DSS certification on the first try.
That's a success story right there.
It really shows how the NIST CSF can work in practice.
It's a structured, risk-based approach that leads to real security.
And it highlights the importance of proactive measures like threat modeling and secure coding.
And that transparent communication is essential for building trust.
Couldn't agree more.
So to wrap up this deep dive, let's recap those core benefits of the NIST CSF 2.0 for bespoke development.
Okay.
Enhanced security.
Top of the list.
Ensured compliance with those increasingly complex regulations.
Absolutely. Improved client trust through transparency and demonstrable security.
That's crucial.
And a structured, flexible framework that can adapt to different development approaches.
So you can use it no matter how you work.
If you're in this industry, I highly recommend you explore how the NIST CSF can be applied to your projects.
There's a lot to learn, but it's worth the effort.
The full NIST CSF 2.0 documentation is available on the NIST website, along with resources like NIST CSWP 29 and the dedicated CSF website.
Definitely check those out.
And here's a final thought for you.
Okay.
In this world of constantly evolving cyber threats and increasing client expectations, think about how proactively adopting a framework like the NIST CSF can be more than just a security measure.
It can be a competitive advantage.
It can be a way to build trust, attract clients, and differentiate yourself.
Absolutely.
So consider embedding this security-first mindset, guided by the NIST CSF, into everything you do.
Make it part of your DNA.
It's an investment that will pay off in the long run.
For sure. And who knows what new opportunities it might unlock.
That's the exciting part.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the NIST CSF 2.0.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.